Thank you, Chloe. So good afternoon, everyone. As Chloe mentioned, my name is John DiLeo. I'm one of the OWASP New Zealand chapter leaders. You heard that earlier, probably. And I'm also in the AppSec division at Datacom. Today, I'm going to be talking about OWASP projects and tools and how they can fit into your AppSec program. And as I started cramming more and more things into the talk, I saw more and more detail disappear. So this is going to be a really quick ride right across the surface. First, as with everyone else, we need to acknowledge our sponsors because without them, we just wouldn't be here. So be sure to visit with them, whether you see them in the exhibition area or just out while you're networking, and thank them for their support. So about me. I have a few past lives. I started out as a simulation developer and system analyst. I was actually a military employee in the US. Then I went to work for that fun company everybody's heard of called MITRE. And I spent some time as a university lecturer. I've taught maths and computer science, IT, electronics, web development, all sorts of fun stuff. I spent about 10 years as a J2EE architect and developer, and then I moved to application security coming up on 7 years ago. So basically, I was one of those security-minded devs who became a security champion and then got the opportunity to change role to an AppSec architect. I've been in New Zealand since the end of 2017. I've been active in OWASP, so I'm here as leader of the New Zealand chapter in Auckland. I got involved with the Software Assurance Maturity Model, or SAMM, almost 3 years ago, and I'm one of the authors of the current version 2.0 model. And I'm also a leader on the AppSec curriculum project, which is looking at both academic and professional development curricula in application security. So where I work and what I do. As I said, I'm at Datacom in the AppSec division. Specifically, I just got hired on. This is my second week as a team lead in what's a new consulting group. So the idea is that we're going to do external consulting where we're doing software assurance maturity assessments based on SAMM, and then provide guidance on how improvements can be made, where we're recommending training and tools and various DevSecOps adoption, helping them with their GRC and so on. While at the same time, internally, we're trying to improve the maturity of our own development team's software assurance practices so that we're eating our own dog food. And so you know, we'll be hiring, and we'll be hiring for a while, and we have several Datacom staff here, so have a chat. So what you can expect to hear in this talk: some of my thoughts about software assurance, some information about SAMM. Now, the talk following mine is also about SAMM. So I'm going to try not to belabor that too much. Just stick around and you'll hear an even better talk about it. You're going to hear the names of lots of OWASP projects. And then you'll hear some thoughts of mine on how you can leverage them and some things you need to be careful about. What you should not expect to hear. As I said, you will not be hearing an in-depth treatment of SAMM. You will not be hearing information about every OWASP project because there are 192 of them. I'll mention about 30, and I'll give you some details on a bit less than 20. And if you're doing the arithmetic, that means less than 2 minutes per project. So here we go. What are some reasons to love OWASP projects? Well, first of all, they're developed and maintained by passionate volunteers who happen to be domain experts. So the threat modeling playbook, which Seba talked about this morning, is developed by threat modeling consultants. You have this supportive community of users and contributors. There's the OWASP Slack. There's a little Heroku app where you enter your email address and you get invited to the Slack. So go do that. And within that Slack, there are, at this point, hundreds of channels. Pretty much every project has a channel, and then a bunch of topic areas have their own channels. So when I was still a relative noob in threat modeling, I asked a question in the threat modeling channel, and I had guys from Torion, where Sable works, answering the question. I had Adam Showstack answering my question. And in my case, the answer was, well, haven't you watched Irene's talk? And then Irene chimed in. So they're all active. You know, the threat modeling community around the world is active in that channel. And the same thing for the SAMM project channel, that all of the authors and other team members are active in the channel. When you have questions, you'll hear back quickly. It's an open source project. I happen to be strongly biased against closed source things, so this fits well with me. It's all in public repos on GitHub. And the project deliverables are free, both as in Freedom and as in Freebeer. Just those deliverables are free. That doesn't mean getting things done is free. A little more on that later. So, what is software assurance? And here's the official definition from the US government 11 years ago. It's still reasonably good. Software assurance is this level of confidence that you've obtained that software is free from vulnerabilities and that it functions in the intended manner. Okay, so you mean what? Well, first, that software assurance means that we're confident that we've been able to attain and maintain high stakeholder confidence in the successful delivery of the features you intended to deliver and no unintended features. That you're preventing, detecting, and removing vulnerabilities, and that you're ensuring your system is reliable and resilient. So there's so much more than a couple of code reviews and hiring a consultant at the last minute to do a pen test right before go live. We never do that, right? So going back to SAMM, so there's my take on what software assurance is about and why we care. Well, now we have this project with software assurance in the name. Kind of see why I decided to be involved. So SAMM is this open framework, and it gives you a measurable way to figure out where you are in terms of software security. And this is not just secure coding practices. It's about having a secure application running in a secure environment with secure backups, secure recoverable backups, that you are operating with a proper data classification management system, and all of the other things that you need to do to protect your application and your users' and customers' data. So, SAMM provides some resources. First thing you can do with it is to evaluate your organization's existing practices. Then you can use it to build a software assurance program. And so this is meant to be a growth program, not perfection, but progress. So you use SAMM as an assessment tool to figure out where you are. You look at the definition of done in SAMM to think about where you should be, and then you can use some of the tools that we provide to map out a path. And because you have this assessment tool, you can go back and say every 6 months, do a reassessment in order to show progress. And you know, the ELT really likes that. If you're spending $50,000 making some improvements, they would like to see some dial move on some pretty graph. So you can use the SAMM measurements to do that. And it helps you to define and measure your activities throughout an organization. So you can do SAMM assessments, say at a product owner portfolio level. And then you can look comparatively across the portfolios in your organization. Here's the basic structure. 5 business functions, 3 practice areas within each function, 2 activity streams within each practice area, 3 activities within each activity stream, so 90 things. Maturity levels. Level 0 is, oh yeah, we don't do that. Can you explain to me what that is? I'm really not sure what we should be doing. So that would probably be level 0. Level 1 is ad hoc things, best effort. We kind of know that we should be doing it. Some teams are taking it seriously and working on it, but there's really no standardization, and it's just not part of what we do. As you get to level 2, this is where it's well defined, it's established as a standard, most teams are doing it, but you don't have good feedback mechanisms in place, so quality is inconsistent. When you get to level 3, that's where we have that consistent measurement and the feedback in order to improve and optimize, kind of level things out across the org. All right, and that's what I'm going to tell you about SAMM. Now let's move on to a gift from another project. And just a remark here, a lot of new projects that are arising in OWASP are sort of meta projects. It's where a volunteer has looked at that 200 projects that we have and all of the deliverables that have been created, some of which have become orphaned because volunteers have moved on, and recognizing one of the most common complaints of website users of the OWASP website is, there's a lot of stuff here, but how do I find things and what do I do with it and how do they fit together? So one of the new projects, the Integration Standards Project, is trying to look at how to relate all of these projects and deliverables to each other so that you know, if I'm trying to improve in this area of the development cycle, I should be looking at these tools. So this is, the next chunk of slides is an attempt at talking about some of the things that we have to contribute to the various phases of this view of an AppSec program. So first, in training and education, there are a few things you might have heard of. We have the OWASP Top 10, which is the Web Application Vulnerability Top 10. There's the Mobile Top 10, the API Top 10. There's an IoT Top 10, which is less well known. We've got a board game. Has anybody here played the OWASP Snakes and Ladders game? Like 2 people? It's actually pretty cool. So the snakes are top 10 vulnerabilities, and the ladders are top 10 proactive controls. So it's a really great awareness tool in the form of a basic board game. A relatively new joiner to the mix is SecureFlag. We have our intentionally vulnerable web apps. Security Shepherd and WebGoat have been around for a long time. PyGoat has been recently updated. And then we have Juice Shop, which is a more recent and much more sophisticated entrant. And as I go through these slides, you'll see that I've got some in bold. Those are the ones I'll actually take a minute to talk about. So the top 10. The OWASP Top 10 project is a flagship project, and it's really the industry's standard awareness document. It represents this broad consensus across the industry, supplemented with actual testing data around what the most prevalent vulnerabilities are. This is not saying that they are the most dangerous or the most often exploited. It's the most often seen vulnerabilities. And what's number 1? Really? Injection. What was number 1 in the 2013 edition? Injection. What was number 1 in the 2010 edition? Injection. That's interesting, isn't it? Does that mean nobody's learning anything? No, it just means we have whole new crops of developers making the same mistakes. So the 2017 version is the one we have now. There is already a candidate list for the new top 10 for a 2021 edition. Guess what's number 1? Injection. The Juice Shop, another flagship project. This is a Node.js, Angular, SQLite. It's a fairly lightweight JavaScript-based application. It is pretty sophisticated, it has lots of cool features, and they're all vulnerable. Every single bit of it is vulnerable. So across the application, it exhibits the entire top 10 and then some. So it has crypto issues and open file shares and upload susceptibilities. It's all there. And it's developed in a way that it's gamified. It's relatively easy to install on a local server to run on your own machine if you want to practice with it. There are some CTF plugins so that you can connect it to popular CTF engines and run it as a game, a competition. If you haven't played with Juice Shop, start now. Now, the SecureFlag open platform. This is one of those weird sort of private nonprofit partnerships. So there's an OWASP volunteer, Andrea, and I can't remember his last name now, sorry Andrea, who developed with his team a platform called SecureFlag. And so there's both a commercial version and an open platform version, which is actually run as an OWASP project and is available, open source, set up your own servers and go for it. And it's a learning platform. So it's similar to things like Secure Code Warrior and other online secure coding learning platforms. It has some built-in courses. You can work through a curriculum for a given language. It has a series of labs which are containerized. It's deployed around the world in AWS. The Sydney region went live a couple of months ago, which caused it to perform acceptably from New Zealand. Imagine that. And it just so happens that if you're an OWASP member, then OWASP is maintaining an instance to which you can have unrestricted access. So this is the first of my pitches for joining OWASP. It's $50 US a year, and if you do nothing other than spend a few hours on the SecureFlag platform, it was probably worth it. This one's interesting. It's kind of a dead project, but the deliverables are still out there and they're still useful. This Security Champions Playbook talks about if you would like to have a Security Champions program and have it be successful, do these 6 things. And the OWASP project that everybody uses and nobody knows it. The core rule set. So the Apache-ModSecurity, which pretty much anybody who's running an Apache server and folks who are running lots of other commercial servers actually depend on, has as its core rule set this project. So it has these generic attack detection rules, and it's set up for various web application firewalls other than not just mod security. And it's tuned to minimize false alerts, which is one of the reasons it's so popular. And it gives you some protection against many common attack categories. So I am not someone who has ever tried to configure CRS, so don't ask me any detailed questions. But it's pretty cool that there's this open source, volunteer managed project that we all depend on. On the requirement side, There's the Security Knowledge Framework, Security RAT, I love the name. And of course, there's the Application Security Verification Standard and the Mobile Application Security Verification Standard. ASVS and MASVS are worthy of long talks by themselves, so not today. The Security Knowledge Framework. It's a Python app. You can download it, install it wherever you want. And it's based on ASVS, so I am still talking about it a little. And the idea is it's set up really as a training platform. It's set up in a way that you can learn as you go. It's not really a training platform, but you can come in here and someone who has relatively little security knowledge can work their way through the framework and go through the checklists and go through the guides, read through the knowledge base, look at the code examples, run the labs, and come away with a pretty good understanding of what the ASVS is looking for in good code and how they can go about doing that in their own code. And if you want to play with it, there's a demo site that you can simply go visit and register on and navigate. Now, Security RAT. It's the Requirements Automation Tool. I couldn't find a nice, succinct way to talk about what it does. Basically, it automates the generation of security requirements. You answer a few questions about the thing you're building or checking security on. You get back a list of security requirements. You decide how you want to address those. And then you persist those decisions directly in your ticketing tool. So it has hooks for Jira and a couple of other ticketing tools. And then whenever your requirements change, you can go into RAT to alter the way you're looking at the requirements and then persist the modified ones into your ticketing tool. And if you'd like, there's a demo instance that's up at securityrat.org. And I believe if you go to the project page on the OWASP website, then there's the standard login. Most of these are set up so that they'll restart every couple of hours, and that way you can't mess them up too badly or for too long. Threat modeling. Well, this is one of my favorite areas. If you listened in this morning on Seba's talk, you heard quite a bit about the Threat Modeling Playbook project. So I won't say much more about that. And then we have a couple of really good tools. We have ThreatDragon and PyTM. And then we've got a game. I love games. Cornucopia. ThreatDragon, isn't he cute? And I'm not sure, but I think the ThreatDragon drawing slightly predates the movie, even though he kind of looks like Toothless. So it's an open source threat model diagram creation tool. It lets you draw your DFDs and enter in the threats. And then you can catalog against the threats, what category they are and what your proposed mitigation is. Now this is a completely free and open source tool. You can download it and run it anytime you want, which is great. So why doesn't everybody do it? Because it has no built-in threat library. You have to enter everything. If you go to one of the commercial tools, they usually come with a fairly extensive threat library that you can pick things from. And really, that many thousands of dollars per application per year that you pay for the commercial tool, it's really about maintaining that library. But it is a good tool. You can run it as a desktop app. You can install it locally as a web app. There's a demo instance that you can just go and run it on. There's a little bit of an issue with the web app that it does not currently support saving to a private repo. So if you use the web app to create a threat model, you have to save it in a public GitHub repo. Yeah, I don't know about that. So I use the desktop version where it saves it as the JSON file, which you could then commit to your source repository with your source artifacts. There's PyTM as ISAR calls it, it's a Pythonic framework for threat modeling. Basically, you write Python code. So you declare each of the elements in your system by instantiating a Python object and giving it characteristics, and then you link them together, and now you've got this model definition. You can then run the Python program you've just written and have it output your data flow diagram. This is an attractive way to do threat modeling because you don't have to worry about adjusting icons on the screen, figuring out how things are going to fit and drawing your arcs and so on. And it also means that you've got just a code file that you can commit alongside your source code. And then there's the cornucopia game. It's a card game, similar to Elevation of Privilege. It has 6 suits like EOP does. Only these are based on secure coding practices. Now, just like Elevation of Privilege, you can go to the OWASP website and order some decks, or you can download the files and get them printed locally. Now, some folks may remember that I did that with Elevation of Privilege a couple of years ago. I'm thinking I might do it for some cornucopia decks too. It ends up being a bit less expensive if we get them printed locally. Make sure you're on the InfoSec NZ Slack so that you'll know if I do that. On the documentation side, and we're still in the what did I do? Okay. So implementation, we've got on documentation, we've got the top 10 proactive controls. So I just mentioned this talking about a couple of the other things like snakes and ladders. So Jim Manico, who was here last year as our keynote, is one of the leads on the Proactive Controls project. And if you met Jim, you know he wrote those words. That every architect and developer should absolutely 100% include in every project. Jim wrote that. So this is a great reference. It was last updated in 2018. There's been some talk that they'll be getting a new version out, but these are basically categories of things that everyone should be doing proactively in their design and implementation to protect their applications. A bit heavy for bedtime reading, but definitely worth it. There's Dependency-Track. And yes, I took these words off of their website. It's an intelligent supply chain component analysis platform. It's an SCA tool. One of the key things about it is that it uses bills of materials. So it allows you to use any of the available tools that will generate a BOM for your application and then import that into Dependency-Track. Now, why is this separate from Dependency-Check? Why do we have these two projects? Well, Dependency-Check, if you use it, will give you a report on the dependencies in the thing you're building. Dependency-Track will import the bills of materials from all the things you build and then give you that cross-portfolio view. So how many different versions of this library are we using? How many of our currently active applications are still using the 1.0 version that has those 3 critical vulnerabilities? So it lets you look across your portfolio and see what your dependency vulnerability burden is. On the verification side, we have quite a few things. I'm going to look at just a couple. We have the Z-Attack proxy, ZAP. There is OWASP Amass. There's Code Pulse. We've got the offensive web testing framework. Anybody who was in the hacking classes on Wednesday and Thursday, they were taught by the folks at 7A Security, which Abraham runs. Abraham's the lead on the OWTF project. And for DefectDojo, Rohit Sharma is going to do a lightning talk tomorrow morning downstairs. So if you're interested in hearing more about that, tune into that project. to that talk. There are a couple of frameworks, and I would argue these are sort of those meta projects. So OWASP Glue and Dracon are about integrating OWASP tools to get them to work together. So how about that ZAP? It is, without a doubt, the world's most widely used web app scanner. It is free, it's open source. It can do passive scanning, where if you simply put it as a proxy in front of your web app, it will watch for bad behaviors like insecure cookies and missing security headers. And it will just do that by watching the traffic go by. You can set it up to do automatic active scanning. So it will crawl your website and then do some standard adversarial tests against the endpoints it finds. You could do manual exploration and instruct it to attempt certain exploits. Then they added in the heads-up display, which was announced June of 2019 at the Open Security Summit. So the team was actually at the summit. They had just finished the first version of the HUD, so they demoed that on Monday, and then they disappeared into one of the villas for the rest of the week. And on Friday morning, they delivered the next release of ZAP. So they spent probably about 50 hours in 4.5 days churning out the next version, and they closed, I think they said they closed about 300 tickets in a week. It's amazing what no sleep will do, right? OWASP Amass was just recently promoted to a flagship project. And isn't it great? ASCII art. It's a DNS enumeration, attack surface mapping, external asset discovery tool. There are some commercial tools you may be aware of that do these things. Now, Amass does not claim to have nearly the kind of feature set that those commercial tools do, but it's still pretty powerful, and it is free and open source. There's CodePulse. So it looks at the code coverage of black box testing activities. This is one I need to learn about. I think it's really cool, and I really would love to start using it, but I haven't yet. But the key thing here is that it's a desktop application, it works across platforms, and it's an agent-based approach. So it works with a lot of different languages and frameworks by inserting an agent and watching the code coverage of the tests that you actually execute. Then there's DefectDojo. It's a workflow management tool for vulnerabilities. And it looks a lot like other workflow management tools, doesn't it? So among the things here is it's got some built-in template generation, report generation, some built-in metrics. So again, if you simply download and start using DefectDojo, you get a lot of cool things for free. Now, I've said that a lot. You get things for free. But as a closing caveat, one of the things I want to say is, well, nothing that's free is ever really free. So don't oversell. If you are going into a discussion with your management and you say, we'd like to start using this tool, and hey, it's free, then they expect you to spend no money. And that's not what's going to happen. Because you have to be realistic about the costs that will be layered on to using that free tool. How much will it cost to maintain your instance? How much time will be spent maintaining it? Are you going to need to do customization? Is there a point where you're going to need to fork the project in order to implement a feature you really need? Those costs can still be less than an alternative commercial tool, but don't let management think they're going to be zero, because then they don't like you when the costs are not zero. And be sure to use the right tool for your use case. Consider what you're really trying to achieve and put the open source tools right there in the comparison with the commercially available tools, as Rafe talked about this morning with SAST and SCA. And then based on your use case or your client's use case, then choose the tool that's going to work best for the situation. Now, one thing I'll point out is if the OWASP tool is not the right tool, the fact that it's a free tool often makes it a good way to get that POC done. You don't have to get it through licensing and spend several $1,000s just to try it out. Or maybe you have to do that demo licensing agreement, and then that salesman never stops calling you. That's never happened to me. And don't be too proud to ask for help. We've got the OWASP community. We have the New Zealand AppSec community. You have the ability to reach out to external consultants like, oh, say, me, if you're looking for some help in trying to implement a particular practice. And again, anybody who is coming in to help you should go back to what's your use case? What's the right tool for your use case, for your size? And then, well, sometimes you find out that you can't get the business case for the right tool approved. So then we'll look at, well, what's the tool they'll pay for? But it's less fun when that happens. Some of the resources that I've leaned on today. So quick, take a picture of the links. The Integration Standards Project, there's the SAMM website. A lot of the information, I scraped that right off of the pages in the OWASP site. The Security Champions Playbook is sitting in a personal GitHub repo, but it's still there. And be sure to join the OWASP Slack. Get in on the conversation. Oh, it worked. 7 minutes left. No, actually, 12 minutes left. So, are there questions? Yes, sir.
Thank you for that talk. Very good. I'm just curious about when you talk about the 5 steps, and one of the steps is governance. You talk about strategy and metrics.
Yes.
I'm curious that metrics were found at that level of governance. What sort of metrics are you talking about here?
Okay. So this is going back to the OWASP 5 business practices. And if I can remember how to manage the view here. Yes. So the question was, strategy and metrics falls under governance in the SAMM model. Well, why is that?
No, I don't wonder about the strategy. I wonder about the metrics.
Okay, the metrics. So this is, at this point, it's really talking about management dashboarding, KPIs. So when you've decided what your security strategy is going to be, what is our AppSec strategy? And this is, in this practice, it's pretty broad. It's, what is your overarching AppSec strategy? We're going to rely on these cloud services, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. We're going to look for certain certifications, whatever you decide is part of that overall strategy. Then coming out of that is, how do we know that we're properly implementing on that strategy? So that's where you define what are our KPIs for it. And how are we going to measure those? How are we going to capture them? So in the SAMM model, it's saying you need to have those. It's not in any way specifying what those metrics have to be or how to compute them, but saying if you've got a strategic objective, the other side of that coin is to define how do you know when you're meeting the objective and how are you tracking against the objective. That nothing in this is, oh, we're going to make a decision, we're going to write a check, problem solved. This is all about attaining and maintaining a level of confidence. So you need to have those metrics, and you need to always be looking at how are we doing against our objectives. So it's seen as a governance function in the model. Yes, sir.
I really appreciate the SAMM. I think it's really good. And I think about it a lot in terms of our company and how we approach things. But we're a software company that builds software for lots of different clients. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on what is a good way to bring some of these things, which are often multi-year efforts or ongoing continuous efforts that you embed into a business, and how you bring that to a small scale, to a client project that you might be working on for a year or two.
Okay, so the question is, if you're building software for a client, how do you fit all of that into those small projects?
Or at least how do you take get better outcomes for security from, if you want to build secure apps, then you kind of get clients to go to.
If you remember in one of the early slides when I said about eating our own dog food, so looking at this, Datacom is a software shop, and this is one of the things that my team is going to be looking at. So I'll have better answers in a year for sure, but generally speaking, a lot of what is in here, you would apply to how you go about doing your business as usual tasks. You would have coding standards, you would have security requirements around your build pipeline. You would have a data classification process that goes into your design. You would have a threat modeling approach that you're using to establish and get sign-off on the security requirements with your customer. And those would become part of your company's DNA. And a lot of that, once you get all of that codified and you produce the nice policy and process documents, then that allows you to answer that question about, are you certified against such and such? Because then you've got all the evidence. But what it really comes down to is, if you're developing software that you're going to, you have a done point and then you turn it over, all of these practices give the customer a really high level of confidence that what you're delivering is secure and of high quality. So you can charge more, hopefully. Any questions from the Slido? Okay. Anything else? Then I thank you for your time.